I'm Corey Winslow of the Medieval European Martial Arts Guild.
And I'm Mike Edelson of the New York Historical Fencing Association. This video is about Zornhau, and specifically it's about a new interpretation that we've come up with that we feel matches the sources very closely. We've had problems with both our own interpretations and those we've seen in the community because while we could all get them to work, they don't match exactly what the sources say. Our definition of matching what the sources say is a little bit stricter than some of what we've seen out there, so for us it's very important for things to match precisely. One of the problems with the previous interpretation of the Zornhau is the fact that it kind of falls apart when you do a committed blow.
Right. When encountering an opponent who hews at you in distance earnestly, which is how we were all, doing the Zornhau, we were doing it against that kind of blow. In order to get the point in front of the opponent's face, as the text specifies, we had to manipulate the distance, because if I just cut a regular cut from above, which is a simple peasant's hew, as the Zornhau is described, my point does not end up in front of his face without me doing something to manipulate the distance. So we were going around this by either collapsing the arms in, so if Mike would cut at me, I could cut like this and shorten myself and have bad structure to get the point in front of his face, or I could cut down like this and go off to the side and then put my point in front of his face, but this is not structurally sound. I could also do something like, if he cuts in at me, step back, but this also has other problems. If he gives me an actual earnest strike where he's trying to hit me within range, all of this falls apart.
Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to examine what the Zornhau actually is. So we're going to put the text on the screen from Danzig.
Zornhau is described as a simple peasant's hew, and our theory on that is if you give someone a sword and you tell them to hit someone with it with wrath, or hit someone with the sword with wrath, they're going to do this, just a simple Oberhowl from above, usually diagonally descending from above. So that's all the Zornhau is. Now its application is a little bit more specific.
Okay, so what we ended up with when we applied this body mechanics and various other considerations to Zornhau is we decided we don't want to shorten our strikes anymore, and we don't want to rely on getting out of the way with footwork. So we've decided that Zornhau must be a simple hew to full extension, okay, so that you have the structure behind the hew. Another reason for that is a thrust, right? If you get the center in a Zornhau, you need to be able to thrust. So when we teach thrust, we all know that we extend the arms first, and then we use our body to thrust, so that the weight of our body and the structure of our arms can allow a powerful thrust that has a chance, for example, to penetrate the skull, because the face is the target of the Zornhau. And another thing is if you're, with footwork, if you're moving backwards to avoid the strike, it's then hard for you to reverse direction and thrust reliably within that small instant that you have before the opponent senses it with Fulin and reacts to you. So we've decided that the distance for Zornhau has to be greater than that from a committed attack in order for this to work. All right, so before we talk about our Zornhau, we want to talk about what it says in the sources, and specifically in the Danzig manuscripts. In the Zornhau section, there's the Duplieren and the Mutieren. And there's an interesting word used there, earnestly. So we're going to put that on the screen. So this word earnestly, what does that mean? When he hews at you earnestly. If he's hewing at you earnestly in that specific section, what is he doing before that section? So what we did is we took a look at the Mutieren and Duplieren and said, what are the differences in those techniques and the rest of the Zornhau? So we're going to show that right now. If Corey were to attack me and I do the Zornhau, okay, from a distance where my point could be in his face, and he's hard on the sword, then I could wind here and stab him in the face. In the same exact situation where I'm closer, I can no longer stab him in the face, but I can do the exact same movement, and that's the clearing. So the difference here is distance. He is closer to me. Now let's look at Mutieren. He is now soft. So if he's soft at this distance where my point's in front of his face, I can just stab him. But if we're closer and he's soft, I can't stab him anymore. So what do? I wind over his sword and stab to a lower opening. So the difference again here is distance. We are closer.
So as you just saw, what we think earnestly means is a committed attack to your opponent within distance.
So if in the Duplieran and Uterine sections, if earnestly means a committed attack, and that word is not used previously, and we've established that the difference between those two techniques and everything else in Zornhau has to be distance, then what exactly is the opponent doing in the previous techniques?
So in order to use the Zornhau org with your point in front of the opponent, we have three possibilities for how to get to that distance. One possibility is that the opponent simply hews out of distance and drives in with his point towards your face, as we discussed in our last video on the general teachings. That seems to be most likely what's going on. The other possibilities are we can create the distance before the opponent hews by subtly stepping back before he hews at us, and then we can also create the distance by stepping back or out to the side at the same time as he hews at us.
Now, in the introduction to the video, I mentioned that we believe in very strict adherence to the sources. So the sources, in this case, put the onus of distance control on the opponent, not on us, because it's when he hews at you earnestly, not when you do something. So the strictest interpretation has to match what the sources say. So that's why we believe that the earlier techniques prior to Duplieran and Uterine take place at a slightly greater distance. Now, why does that happen in an actual fight? People who have experience in competition or just fencing understand that a lot of people make this mistake, and KDF exists to exploit the mistakes of common fencers, and this is a huge one. 133, there are people who believe that the way you attack in 133 is you cut out of distance and then enter into a bind with a thrust, which is similar to what we talked about in our last video. This Zornhau would break that. So basically, the onus is on the opponent. What you do is respond to the opponent to match what the sources say. Now we're going to show you the Zornhau plays as we see them, starting from the basic Zornort and progressing from there. Okay, so those attacks were done slightly out of distance. Now we're going to look at what happens when a committed attack is used against you, and you do the exact same thing, but the distance changes. Okay, so we've covered the fact that we believe that fidelity to sources is critical if you're doing HEMA. If you're not doing exactly what the sources say, if it doesn't match it, then in our opinion, it's not HEMA, it's not historical. So every little element of the sources has to be obeyed. The sources don't tell you how to do everything, right? They don't tell you how to hold the sword, except the one that does, and people still rip the palm. But they don't tell you everything. But the things they do tell you, you have to listen to.
As you can read in the text, it specifies that when the opponent hews at you earnestly from above, for the Duplieran and Uterine, you were to hew earnestly back at his head in the same way that he hewed at you. This advice is absent from the earlier plays where you were told to hew without any parrying, without any displacement, and put the point in front of his face.
So that's actually another very critical hint from the sources about what they want us to do. That description is absent in the earlier techniques. So you can say, well, I always hew at his head because that's how you do Zornhau. And in a manner of speaking, the way we think about things, maybe. But what we need to pay attention to is the fact that that is absent from the earlier techniques. And that is yet a fourth element that tells us that the distance is different. It's different because we are told different things. We're told he attacks earnestly. We're now aiming at the head. The techniques used don't work at a greater distance. So all these things combined create this distinction that we have to pay attention to if we claim to be following the sources.
We hope that this video will be helpful in your studies.
Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in our next video.